Hello everyone and good morning. Welcome to another video. Today I'll be talking about citric acid and why it's used in both bar and liquid soap, benefits of lye excess in liquid soap, and sorting out soap scum. I thought this was like another important topic for me to cover, and there are actually some new things I learned in regards to citric acid in bar soap that I didn't actually quite think of in the past. But I did a lot of research in the last couple of weeks because I came across some materials online, and I've seen that of the uses of why it is in bar soap, and I have looked at commercial brands of bar soap, and I have seen citric acid listed in the ingredients list, and I always wondered why. I always thought it was for an antioxidant, but it's actually to create sodium citrate, which we will cover in the upcoming slides. So stay tuned. It's not going to be a long video, it's just a quick overview of citric acid in soap making. So what is citric acid? So citric acid is an organic material. It's found usually in a variety of citrus fruits like lemon, limes, oranges and tangerine. But in lemon, it has the most concentration of citric acid, and by weight it consists of 8%. And I get this question a lot as well from other people that I know that are interested in soap making, or I have gotten it quite a bit online, and I've actually read this topic, a topic regarding is citric acid natural. And I've done a lot of research in regards to certifying bodies, like, organic certifying bodies like USDA or the ACO, and it's actually considered an approved input. So it's, even though the majority of it on the market is man-made and produced in a lab, it's actually in nature identical. And it's generally free from impurities and anything to worry about for the use, especially in cosmetics and even food grade. So I thought it was just important to point that out. But you can actually source citric acid that's from fermented fruits and vegetables. I know for me personally, I source my citric acid from a local supplier, and it's actually fermented from corn. So it's just a personal preference which one you're fine with using. Me personally, I'm fine using the fermented citric acid from corn, that's fine. And you just source whatever you're comfortable with, but I'm just giving a general overview of the two types of citric acid you can obtain from the market. Usually, and I think it's relatively accessible, both variations across the world. I know in Australia it's accessible. So I think in the States or in Europe or wherever you're from, it should be relatively easy to source either one. And I'll just point out that both of these citric acids are approved by natural and organic certifying bodies. So why is citric acid used in both bar and liquid soap? So for bar soap, it creates sodium hydroxide. When combined with citric acid, it creates a reaction and it causes it to create sodium citrate. The same for potassium hydroxide. When it comes into citric acid, comes into contact, it creates potassium citrate, and this is added between 1 and 3% of your total carrier oil weight in your recipe, and that's the same for both, whether you're working with bar or liquid. The benefits of this is it reduces soap scum in hard water, and it enables it to be washed away. It combines and fuses with heavy metals, and it just flushes down the drain, just washes it down the drain. I personally don't use citric acid in bar soap. I'm not too sure if Australia has hard water. I haven't really heard anything in regards from customers or anything like that. At home here, I think the water's pretty good, and I've never had any issues with soap scum, so I'm not quite sure if I will add it in future. If people get back to me and they tell me that it does cause a little bit of soap scum over time, then I might consider maybe adding it at 1%. But so far, for now, I haven't really come across that issue. And if anyone is in Australia watching this video, just let me know if, depending on your location, if soap scum is an issue in your area. It'll be interesting for me to find out if that's an issue here, but so far I just don't think it is. And citric acid in regards to liquid soap, when using a lye excess, which I use in all my recipes, it's actually used to neutralize the excess lye. So then it becomes safe to use on the skin. So the benefits for having a lye excess in your liquid soap recipe, especially if you're planning to sell it, ensures all the oils in your recipe have gone through saponification. So essentially you don't want any superfat, and even if you formulate your liquid soap recipe at 0% superfat, we know from my previous SAP calculation video, plus if you're a soap maker, you know that lye purity for potassium hydroxide is nowhere near 100%, it's actually 90%. So you could very well end up, each batch, between batches, you can end up at 0% superfat either at end result with a lye excess or a superfat. So it's just depending on the batch of potassium hydroxide you have from your manufacturer, or it could even differ between as you use it, as you go through the container. The further you get down, it could be more pure or it could be less pure. So it's just, on average, it's 90%. So that's why it's really important to counter in that inconsistency with potassium hydroxide. So always doing a 10% lye excess is a really good way of sorting out any of those issues. And obviously, when you're not having free oils floating around in your liquid soap, it does have a longer shelf life. So it can still go rancid, but it's very minimal compared to if there's just free oils floating around. And of course, it depends on the shelf life of the carrier oils that you have actually used in your recipe. So using a longer shelf life of oils in your recipe will reduce rancidity. And of course, no separation, and you end up with a clearer, more transparent base for your liquid soap. In liquid soap, I find, and this is something I kind of discovered when I was researching why citric acid is used in bar soap, and unknowingly, there is a double effect with using citric acid to neutralize liquid soap. The excess lye, as you've seen in my liquid soap making videos, I neutralize the excess lye with citric acid. Unknowingly, I was creating potassium citrate, so obviously that eliminates soap scum. So if in the future, like if someone informs me of the bar soap that it's creating soap scum, depending on where they're located in Australia, if they have hard water, I don't really have to worry about changing anything on the liquid soap side of things, because I already am creating potassium citrate in my liquid soap. So this is like a double benefit in liquid soap in regards to excess lye usage and using citric acid. Right, so as you know, that I do like to get my calculator out, and I like to understand what's happening behind the scenes, and I like to make sure that whenever I come across a situation where I don't have internet, or maybe the lye calc I use becomes unavailable, they close down, whatever the situation is, I like to know exactly formulas, and I have them written down, so whenever I need to calculate something, I know exactly what to do and where to go, and I will have no issues calculating using my calculator and using a pen and paper if need be. So based on a 1,000 gram or 1 kilo oil amount, when we're calculating citric acid for both liquid soap and bar soap, it doesn't matter which oil you're using, because we're focusing purely on the lye and purely on the oil amount. So when we look at 1%, if you want to do 1%, if you've got slightly hard water, and 2% if you've got fairly good amount of hard water, and 3% is when you've got really solid hard water and you really want to combat soap scum. So just for argument's sake, for this demonstration, we'll be sticking with 2% citric acid because it's right in the middle, and we're assuming 100% lye purity obviously and 0% superfat because we're concentrating purely on the lye and not on so much sap values. So if we get our calculator, and obviously 2% of 1,000 grams, so we do 2 times 1,000 divided by 100, and that's 20 grams. So we know for sodium hydroxide, 1 gram of citric acid reacts with 0.63 grams of sodium hydroxide, and 1 gram of citric acid reacts with 0.88 grams of potassium hydroxide. So if we go further down, for the sodium hydroxide portion, we know 20 grams from our oil amount times 0.63 grams equals 12.6 grams of sodium citrate, because the reaction that happens, it creates 12.6 grams. And it's the same for potassium hydroxide. When we do 20 grams times 0.88, we end up 17.6 grams of potassium citrate. So to work out the lye discount that we get, obviously we minus 12.6 from the sodium hydroxide portion, and we assumed 130 grams of lye is required just for argument's sake, and we subtract 12.6 from 130, we end up with 117.4, and the same with potassium hydroxide, we subtract 17.6 from 130, and we end up with 112.4. So this obviously creates a superfat. But I'm not going to confuse you because the calculation is very complex, and I'm happy to go into that very complex calculation. But just for simplicity's sake, I'll just stop the calculations here. And when you're in your actual lye calc, when you put in your superfat amount, it takes into consideration that plus what you're adding for sodium citrate, and you don't have to do any additional. You just follow exactly in order how much lye you're using and how much citric acid you're using, and the lye calculator takes care of all those complex calculations for you. But I mean, by all means, if viewers want me to go into detail on the complex calculations, let me know and I'll be happy to make another video, but I don't think it's necessary. But yes, I'm just going to keep it as simple as possible, and this is just the base calculation. So just quickly on the bottom, we're going to be looking at when we subtract from the 130 gram required sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide. So to bring it back to equilibrium, so it's a 0% superfat instead of there being a superfat after the citric acid reacts with that certain amount of sodium hydroxide or potassium hydroxide. You add for the sodium hydroxide portion on top of the 130 grams. So you do 12.6 plus 130, and that's 142.6 grams of lye. And that brings it back to equilibrium, and then you obviously do the same for the potassium hydroxide. You do 130 plus 17.6, and that gives you the required figure. So when you add the citric acid to your lye water, again it brings it back to equilibrium at 0%. So I just thought I'd cover that quick before we continue on. Right, so another thing we have to consider when making liquid soap, I haven't used many different oils or other types of butters that have unsaponifiables, so I'm only referring to the two I know about and that I've actually researched. And if you're formulating liquid soap with avocado oil or shea butter, you have to take into consideration that there are portions by weight inside either the avocado or the shea butter that's unsaponifiable. So that will always create a superfat no matter how much lye you add. It's not going to convert 8% of the avocado oil, and with shea butter it's a range. It's never a fixed percent, between 7 and 15% unsaponifiable. So you can add 10 times the amount of lye required, and you will never convert that percentage minimum to soap. So we have to keep in mind, especially if you're selling it. I know I do have a cocoa shea liquid soap that I sell, and I'm quite comfortable in selling because I do use that at a fairly low percentage. I use that at 5%. I don't want to go too high because there'll be a lot of free floating oils, but I do use guar gum to suspend any unsaponifiables that may come out of the end result, and I'm quite comfortable in doing that. I'm experienced in doing that, and if you wanted to give it a try, that's completely fine. I recommend hydrating guar gum first in glycerin before adding it into your liquid soap, and I've demonstrated this in my liquid soap videos. So this is Unsaponifiables. In bar soap, you still have to kind of take into consideration, because if you're using, say, 10% shea butter and say 5% avocado oil in a recipe, let's say you're using both, and you've got a 5% superfat, you're essentially having a higher than 5% superfat in your end result because of the unsaponifiables. So you just got to bear in mind what oils and butters you're working with, and do your research on if anything you're using, any inputs do have unsaponifiables in them. So another important thing I'll cover before wrapping up is, can you superfat liquid soap? Yes, absolutely you can superfat liquid soap. I'll try and keep it under 2%. I recommend it for home use only, unless you are going to suspend your product with some sort of gum like guar gum. I prefer guar gum over xanthan gum. Xanthan gum is a nightmare to try and incorporate into your liquid soap recipe. It clumps up. It doesn't hydrate very well. Guar gum is really easy to work with, so I use guar gum in my recipes. And again, even at 2% superfat, like mentioned previously, it doesn't mean you will end up with a 2% superfat. You could end up with a higher superfat, or a 0% superfat, or a slight lye excess because of potassium hydroxide not being as pure as sodium hydroxide. It's got a 90% purity, so we have to take that into consideration as well. But for argument's sake, let's say 2%, yes, and let's say you get 2% superfat in your end result, you can absolutely use a superfatting liquid soap. It's safe to use, it won't cause any issues. It does have an aesthetic issue, I guess, associated with it when you see separation, but overall it's safe. It's not something that you really have to worry about. If you're looking to superfat effectively without using a superfat like for your carrier oil, I would recommend using glycerin, because it is actually oil soluble. It doesn't create any superfat. It doesn't cause any separation. It's very high in conditioning and moisturizing properties. It attracts moisture to the skin, so it's very good skin additive to use in a liquid soap. It can be added at the dilution phase, or after when you dilute. After I dilute, I actually hydrate guar gum in glycerin, and then I add that to my finished product, and it's relatively inexpensive. It's really easy to add into your recipe. I recommend between 20 and 50% of your oil weight. I personally stick to around 40%, so 400 grams per 1,000 grams of oil. And I find that's just such a sweet spot, and it's very, very nice in adding into liquid soap. So I highly recommend you trying that out if you haven't tried that out previously. It's just such a great additive to add. You won't regret it. Like, after using it, you'll feel the difference, because me personally, my skin type, and I've got sensitive / combination oily skin, I do find liquid soap to be drying overall, but adding that glycerin, it's quite nice. So I find even if my recipe is 100% olive oil, it just dries my skin out. I don't know, my skin and liquid soap aren't the best of friends. I find bar soap beautiful to use on my skin. It just also depends on you as an individual. But I do find it a lot better for me if I add glycerin. So I've just overall added glycerin to all my liquid soap recipes. Right, so we've made it to the end. Hopefully it wasn't another overloaded video for you. I tried to keep the calculations to a minimal. I thought I'll just focus more on the whys and the hows for this particular video. Thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to like the video, share and subscribe, and head on over to my Instagram and Facebook. And I love reading comments in the comments section, so go for your live. If you find my content useful, head on to the content creation donation page on my website and make a small donation, and that's to sustain me for releasing more videos in the future. Thanks so much for tuning in, and be safe, happy formulating, and until next time, bye for now.